Great. So thank you. I'm talking today about how do you measure success of your strategic plan? So could you raise your hand if your organization has a strategic plan? That's really impressive. And how many of you measure it? Very good. So what I'm going to show you today is a learning and a history from the city of Fort Collins. It's an approach that works for us. May or may not work for your organizations. And you really do have to right-size your approach to your organization and to your culture. But with that, based on the previous conversation, really important to take risks, push that boundary, engage with your community, and make sure that the things that you're doing, that you're telling your story. And a strategic plan is a fantastic way not only to drive an organization, but to use that to help tell your story to the community. I'm going to start with our budgeting process, and this is not going to be about budget, but we use a process called Budgeting for Outcomes, or BFO. We implemented that in 2005, and that process, part of that was to create what are called outcomes. And so our outcomes they're just groupings of the programs and services that we provide to the community. And so we have neighborhood livability and social health, culture and recreation, economic health, environmental health, safe community, transportation, and then very apropos, high-performing government. So these we refer to as our 7 key strategic outcomes. And the question is, how do we know when we're being successful in achieving our outcomes for our community? So before I talk to where we are today, it's important to know about our history, the journey that we've gone through with the city, some of the things that worked for us, and some of the places where we missed the mark. What were our learning opportunities? So, back in 2009 through 2011, we took our first attempt at doing metric reporting to our community. We did that through a tool, a published document called the Community Scorecard. It was, and you can see the URL there at the bottom. And so, it reflected our outcomes from the previous slide. So we break down a lot of the things we do from strategic planning and budgeting and reporting, using those same outcomes, not only for consistency within communicating within our organization, but externally to the community as well. So this document, it was a good first step. It was a fantastic marketing piece. It was light, it was glossy and shiny, it had pictures in it. But it just showed our current performance and trends. Of the 70 metrics that were in there, only one had a target. And so, somewhat interesting to show how you're performing today. But if you can't tell your community what you're striving towards, it's not nearly as effective. So we had an opportunity there. We had no benchmarks within that document in any of those 70 metrics. It was very time intensive to produce this document, and it was only done on an annual basis. So it wasn't real-time information that could be useful within managerial and executive level discussions. So 2011 also happened to be the year that we started what we call our performance excellence journey with an organization called RIMPEX, or Rocky Mountain Performance Excellence. Who's heard of RIMPEX before? Anybody? So RIMPEX is our regional equivalent to the National Mountain Baldrige criteria. And this organization was really helpful for us because what that entailed was providing an application about what you do in your organization. The benefit of that is the feedback that they provide about the things that you're doing well and where can you improve. And one of the opportunities for us to improve was around measurement. And it was acknowledged that we did lots of great things with measures, but we did not have a systematic and enterprise-wide, city-wide approach to how we used measures. And that was really the catalyst for our community dashboard, which launched in 2013. What this is again, we've got those same outcomes for consistency, but we wanted to communicate how are we doing in achieving each of those outcomes. And so on the website, you can click on any of those outcomes. You can see, for instance, in Safe Community, for the second quarter of 2017, we were yellow. So everything gets a red, yellow, or green as far as our performance. If you clicked on that, then you will go down and you'll see the specific metrics that are included within that outcome. And then on any of those metrics, you can click on it to see the chart, the graph, the performance of the target, benchmarks, if applicable, the analysis statement of that performance. And so for us, this was a really great way to start saying, how are we doing in actually achieving these outcomes that we've said are important to our community? So some of the things that worked really well is that we involved our council. They were involved right away, and that was really helpful in getting there by they helped us determine the specific metrics that we're reporting on, and that they can now, when they're talking to community members, they can pull it up on their iPad and they can go through those and share that data with constituents as they're talking to them. And for us, we wanted to allow whoever was viewing the website the ability to put their finger on the pulse of Fort Collins, not the city organization, but where we live as a community. And so in that, we have metrics that we have a high level of impact on, like voluntary code compliance. But then we also include metrics on unemployment. There's very little that the city of Fort Collins is going to do to directly impact our unemployment rate. But for residents and businesses in Fort Collins, as well as anybody considering relocating, we wanted to give you a holistic picture of the overall health of our city. It was very manual to update. It took a few years for us to get that automated, and that required getting all of our performance data into a centralized repository for that reporting. And just having a dashboard to show our metrics, well, that's great. It's like putting metrics in your budget book and putting it on a shelf, right? What the value is in the dialogue that you have as an organization. And so on our quarter, we would update the community dashboard on a quarterly basis. We would bring in all of our department heads, that's about 30, 35 people. We report to our executives, or we call service area directors. That group of about 40 people would be in a room. We'd spend a couple hours going through those metrics and the performance, talking about the analysis, challenging each other on the targets. And our thought process was anybody at that level of the organization or above should ideally want to understand about the greater city performance, even if it was outside of their area, right? We were very wrong about that. They didn't feel like they were getting value. If you think about 40 department heads and executives in a room for a couple hours, it's a pretty darn expensive meeting, right? So they weren't getting value. And so after we did that for a few quarters, and we got that feedback, we stopped. We said, okay, we're going to need to take a different approach. So we kept the community dashboard, and we said, as far as our managerial review of this, we're going to have to reset and find a better way to do this. In the following year, in 2014, is when we took a stab at our first strategic plan. This is a picture of it here. If you go to the website at the bottom there, you'll see it's a different one. The one that we launched, our 2016 strategic plan. We do a biannual budget, and so we put the strategic plan updates on the same refresh frequency of doing it every 2 years. So right now we have our 2016 strategic plan. It was a good first step for us, and what it allowed us to do was to take a lot of the plans that we had. So we have a thing called city plan that looks out 25, 30 years. We have what we call master plans, which are also longer-term vision documents for a lot of departments within the city. But when you read those documents, it's hard to say, well, what's a longer-term goal and need, and what is shorter term? And so what we were trying to do was to say, within this shorter period of time, a 5-year time horizon, what does the city need to focus on? We involved council in that, which was a really good thing to do. And in 2014, they did not choose to adopt our strategic plan. When we went back to it in 2016 with that refresh, they said, you know what, as the board of directors, it's probably a good thing if we would adopt the city's strategy. And so now that is included in our formal process. But the metrics that we used in that first iteration in 2014 were those community dashboard metrics from that online tool. Well, one of the problems is that although we aligned those metrics to our outcomes, there wasn't necessarily a linkage and alignment to the strategic objectives. So the strategic objective being within transportation, what are the 5 to 7 things that we're trying to accomplish over a 5-year time horizon? So we had an opportunity to do better with metrics there. And also, in both our 2014 and 2016 strategic plans, we included not only what the issues and opportunities were and why it was important, but we included the how. And the feedback that we got from our council was, your strategic plan shouldn't include the how you're going to get these things done. Our budgeting process should take care of that. And I think that this yeah, I got a warning that the battery might be dead. So if you can't hear me, raise your hand and I'll try and speak a little bit louder. With that, the strategic plan itself should focus on the what and the why, and then allow your budgeting process to handle how you're going to accomplish those organizational and community needs. So in that same year, we made some improvements with our budgeting process, where we linked not only every budget request that we call an offer, it had to link to a strategic objective. It also had to, more importantly, say how will funding this program or service actually help us achieve that strategic objective. In those budget requests, we also had our measures included. So every budget request had to have a measure. And we are very much about transparency for our community. And so if you would go to this website at the bottom, you'd be able to click on the entire document there on the left. But that just has a summary of these budget requests. Those links on the right-hand side within each of our outcomes, those contain the entire document. It's over 2,000 pages of all of the various budget requests that were in consideration for being funded. And within each of those, and you can go online and do this yourself, you can see how every budget request ties to at least one strategic objective. And we also have a section where you get down where it says performance measures. You can click on that link, and then that will open up a new web page that shows you the chart and the graph that shows the performance and the targets and the benchmarks, if we have them, associated with that metric. So really powerful as far as transparency to the community. So we were able to link to charts and graphs, indicate how we are going to achieve the strategic plan with each of those budget requests. Again, we leveraged that central repository of data, and it was posted online for transparency. But for opportunities, a lot of our metrics at the funding of a budget request were too operational for a strategic plan. I like to use the example of how many pounds of chemicals and materials you may use to treat your water, right? Your neighbors don't care. What they want to know is that you have safe, clean drinking water, right? And so if we want to be transparent about our metrics, if we put out all those operational metrics, people will glaze over. It needs to be at that higher level of more strategic interest of the community, like, do you have clean drinking water? And also, although we had metrics linking to our budgets, we did not really have a good linkage of metrics to our strategic plan. So again, more opportunities. The next year in 2015, we took our first foray into executive level reviews. We call these quarterly service area reviews, or QSARs. And in that, that's an opportunity for each service area director, remember they're an executive in charge of a number of departments. It was an opportunity for that service area director to meet with our CEO, our COO, and our CFO. Of course, we would more commonly refer to those as our city manager, our deputy city manager, and chief financial officer. The reason we use those terms, though, is because a lot of our thinking is we think that there's a lot of good that we can take from the private sector to put into our public sector thinking. So we often refer to those three positions of executives as CEO, COO, and CFO. So this is an example of a metrics report that was included there. So again, this is coming from that centralized repository, but in these dialogues with those three executives and the departments of that service area, now we can have a conversation around standard topics like safety, our financial performance, comparing our actuals to budget, metrics. So here's an example of a metrics report that showed a chart and a graph. On the left-hand side, you can see the red, yellow, green performance of a metric. It had years of, or quarters of the history of that relative to target, and then an analysis statement. This was a good first step at having this executive level review of organizational performance. But again, we had some learnings. So if you remember back to the community dashboard discussion where we had those department heads all in a room and we weren't getting value out of it, well, now we had an audience-appropriate group of people in these meetings. Because these were the people who were out in their organizations as department heads. Their organizations were delivering these programs and services. They could directly speak to the safety budget, the financial performance, and the operational issues that they were experiencing. So these meetings were very well received. We still do them today. But one of the things we realized is that we had way too many metrics. We've basically taken all the metrics from our budget requests, something like 500 metrics, to feed them into these reviews. That's just way too many measures for any one organization to really focus on. So that was an opportunity. And although we had discussions about the metrics, what we didn't have is the context of why is this metric important? And that opportunity was really to link that metric to the strategic plan. So that's our background of where we got to prior to 2017. I went in a chronological order. You see, we made forays in with enhancements we did to our budget process. We started a strategic plan. We have put metrics on our website. If I look back on that, it would have been really nice if we had this all mapped out and we said, we're going to do this very methodically. We didn't. We took each of these pieces together, and as we looked at process improvement and how we can make each of them better, we said what really is the power there is the integration of strategic planning with budgeting, with performance measurement, and with continuous improvement of how do you get better as an organization. So here's where we are today. So we start with our vision, mission, values. We actually created our vision, mission, values back in, I think, 2006, 2007. It's been refined at least once or twice in that period of time. But really, these are guiding concepts for our organization. These aren't lip service. There are organizations that are like, oh, well, we're going to do a vision, mission, value because it's the right thing to do. And then maybe we'll put it on a wall. And that's it. Well, for us, the vision, mission, value is really critically important for how we operate for our community. And it's really at the center of our leadership system. Our leadership system is comprised of these various processes that are in green. When we were a smaller organization, a younger organization, there was a lot of autonomy in each of the departments. We're small. You can do things however you want it. And that worked best for your department, your sub-organization within the broader city. As we've become larger and matured, there is a realization that sometimes by systematizing and having a citywide process, it is of greater value to the entire city, even though it might be a slight step backward for any one department. That's a trade-off that we've decided to make. And so regardless of where you are in the city, these processes around the outside there are standard. They're systematic across the entire city. From that, there we go. If we look at our kind of a strategy hierarchy, at that top level, those are those 7 outcomes that I mentioned at the very beginning: transportation, economic health, etc. Those outcomes, those key strategic outcomes, as I mentioned, they're used in a lot of the processes that we do. Within each of those outcomes, then we have 6 to 9 strategic objectives. Again, that's the what are we trying to accomplish, and then we've got metrics tied to each of those strategic objectives. And then foundationally, we have what are the programs and services that we'll refer to as initiatives that were funded in the budget, and how do they link to our strategic objectives, to that strategic plan that help us achieve those things that we've said are really important for the community. We've actually now included this into our 2-year budgeting process. We say that our budgeting process begins with the strategic plan. So in 2017, we're at the top in that yellow band after our council elections. In the fall, late summer and fall, we have a number of inputs that we get for our strategic plan. What we call a strategic risk assessment, a capital improvement plan, a 10-year long-term financial plan. we're getting inputs from the community, from our council, from our department heads. Then we have our strategic planning process. In the beginning of 2018, in February and March, we'll go to council to get their feedback on it. Ultimately, they will adopt it. That plan then is what drives our budgeting process, which takes the majority of that second year. It's a pretty intensive process, very transparent to the community, but there is an investment of the staff time that we do. But we honestly believe that we're getting solid value and that the community and our council is getting value out of this budgeting process. So this is our 2-year planning horizon. If we take a deeper dive into our strategic planning process, we would refer to it as an issues-based strategic plan. We're looking at what are the issues and opportunities that are facing the city in the next 5 years. We have 3 primary areas of input. First is our community. And so with our Communications and Public Involvement Office, which Claire used to be a part of, we do really 3 ways of getting this information. We have a community survey that goes out to about 3,000 residents, and that is a statistically valid set of data that we use. We have about 120 questions that are asked in that. We also have an online presence, and through different events and social media, we will push people to the website where they can provide that feedback for us. And then lastly, we have what we call a go-to-them model. We used to have a process whereby if we wanted citizen feedback, we would communicate, please show up at City Hall on Thursday night at 6 o'clock and give us your feedback. Well, for the handful of people who would show up, it was always the similar demographics. It was not representative of residents of Fort Collins. And so we've really done a turnabout, and now we go to organizations. We're trying to get that demographic across the entire city. So we'll go to our business community through our Downtown Development Authority, our Downtown Business Association, the Chamber of Commerce, but we'll also go to philanthropic groups. We'll go and we'll talk to the seniors in our city, but we'll talk to youth at Colorado State University. And just last week, I was at one of our high schools to a senior government class because they're a voice too. We talk with people for whom English is not their first language. We talk to people who are just kind of like at random, at community events like a farmer's market. And we'll talk to low income, and we'll go and we'll talk with homeless people. Because all of us are utilizing programs and services that the city provides. How can we best do that if we really haven't heard you? And the only way we can really hear you is if we have that broad demographic voice. Second is our council. Obviously, as representatives of our community, their voice is critically important. And so after that, they come on board with the elections, they have a retreat, they plan their priorities. Of course, this will shift during time, but that information about their priorities is a key input for our strategic planning process. And then lastly, our department heads. And we ask them, what are the 2 or 3 things that keep you up at night? What are those issues or opportunities that are forefront on your mind? Tell us those. And from those inputs, across the board, as well as some of the other ones I showed on that previous slide, like our long-term financial plan, we do what is a really technical term that we call the squishy work. And that's a core team of people who take all these inputs, and then we draft the strategic objectives within our strategic plan. We then meet with a broader group of people, referred to as the steering committee, which is our entire executive team, and the chairpersons of teams from our budgeting process. And then ultimately, we go to council, we get their feedback, and then that will drive our budgeting process. And that last bullet point here, really key piece now is that we have metrics and initiatives tied to our strategic plan. Again, if we just left it as a strategic plan and used it to drive our budget process, that might be good, but the value is in how you use it, the dialogue that happens. And so we implemented this year what we call strategy maps. And its purpose is how are we doing in achieving our strategic plan from 2 lenses. First, the metrics that we have associated with each strategic objective. And what are all the things that we funded in the budget that support each strategic objective? And so what we've done now is we have these meetings monthly. They are with the entire executive team. and all of the department heads who are associated with any of those metrics or the programs and services that were funded to support those strategic objectives with any given outcome that we're talking about, like transportation. And so they're at the meeting. So we have, as the appropriate level of audience, they've been really rich and robust discussions. And one of the things that I've found is very interesting is that we've historically funded things in the budget, and then priorities change, maybe something goes on the back burner, and someone says, well, what happened to that? We funded this budget request. Oh, yeah, we got anything with it. And as we went through the year, we found more and more of those things. With the implementation of our strategy maps, we don't see that anymore because it's all visible. Everything that we fund, whether it was in the 2-year budget or any supplemental appropriation since, they're all in there. So they're all getting visibility. They're all getting talked about. And whether it's a metric or it's an initiative, again, initiative being a program or service, if it's not performing at what we would say a green level, if it's a yellow or red, then we have to include what's an action plan to get back on track. This dialogue has been really powerful. And one of the things that's been fascinating for me is I have a software system that I was going to train a bunch of department heads to go and be able to input this information, right? I had a fear that department heads would say, I can't learn a new software system. I need to do that for somebody having someone on my staff. And what I told them is, in the amount of time it would take you to convey the information that you want on the performance of your metrics and your initiatives, you could be inputting that information yourself. And so as I'm having these dialogues, teaching people how to use our software system to input this data, department heads are giving me just anecdotal information that now, for the first time, this makes sense. Because the metrics that they have to report on are tied to our strategic plan. Everything that we funded in the budget is tied to the strategic plan. They see that alignment and it makes sense to them. So this isn't no longer this is just an activity because the executive team said we have to do this. People are seeing the value in having these discussions about, which is ultimately measuring our success of achieving our strategic plan. So here's an example of what it looks like. At the top there, in yellow, it says 6.2, improve traffic flow to benefit both individuals and a business community. So that's one of our strategic objectives. The first lens is metrics. So these are all metrics that we have that are directly linked to that strategic objective. The yellow is calculated as an average of that performance. Now you'll notice that that very first line, it's a gray. That metric says the percent that commute mode share, so they're not driving a car. That was a new metric that we just added. So we're always evaluating the metrics. So we don't have any data for that. But that's something that we will be adding new data, and then that will feed in to the overall performance of this strategic objective. And as I mentioned, this metric right here, that one was underperforming in red. So it's got an action plan about what we're going to do to get back on track. And then we look at the same thing through all the various things that are funded in the budget to support this strategic objective. So that's a visual of these reports that we use that are used as the basis for these dialogues. And it gives us a sense of how are we performing on those commitments to the community. Because we really look at what we fund in the budget is a commitment to deliver those programs and services using taxpayer and ratepayer dollars. But we do have opportunities ahead of us for 2018 and beyond. For some metrics, or for some strategic objectives, we still have an opportunity to have better metrics assigned us. So we're looking at that. We also have an opportunity to refine and better define our strategic objectives. We have some that I will admit, I will call motherhood and apple pie. Almost anything fits underneath there. Now that was by design. So we have one as for high-performing government, it was providing world-class services to our community, right? How do you measure that? So it's really amorphous, right? So we want to become more specific. But the reason that we did that is because we had a desire that every employee in Fort Collins, including hourly, with 2,400 employees, we had a desire that every employee could look at that strategic plan and say, I see myself. I see the work that I do and how that's part of this guiding document. That was really important to us. But to do that, we had to have some strategic objectives that were amorphous. So to the extent that we're going to make them more specific, we will lose that connectivity with some of our staff. And that's a trade-off that we're very conscious about. Now, we could be extremely prescriptive and say, we want to reduce homelessness by 10% by 2019. Right? We're not trying to go to that extreme level of specificity, but we're trying to move in that direction to make our strategic objectives more measurable, so that we can see what is our performance and how do we get back on track if we are underperforming. And then lastly, this is an internal document now, at least for that metrics piece, just like our community dashboard, I'm going to push heavily that we get this out there on our website so that it's another aspect of transparency for our community, because I don't see if there's any reason that we should not be very open and honest with our community about the performance of our measures. And in some cases, we're knocking it out of the park. In some cases, like affordable housing, we're not. And so how do we get better? Let's acknowledge that we are not on target, and we're going to have dialogue about what can we fund in our budget to improve that strategic objective about having homes that are affordable, regardless of your income level. So now I'm going to zoom out. Have you heard of PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act? It's a continuous improvement process. And so really a number of things that I've talked about today really fit well into this. So for our plan, we start with our strategic plan. That drives our budgeting process, which is nothing more than a financial and operational plan. Then we go and we provide those programs and services to our community that were approved by our council. We use performance measurement to check how are we doing on those commitments to our community. And then through those executive level reviews of those QSARs and our strategy maps, both of which are happening on a monthly basis, is how we say, where are we not performing well and what do we need to do? What action do we need to take to get back on track? So, for many of you, you remember the chalkboard from school, whether it was green or black. A lot of my children, they don't know what a chalkboard is now. But we have the same types of grades, right? So you're familiar with ABCDE. I'm going to give them slightly different definitions. And I want you to think about this with your organization. So if you're getting an E, you're like a newborn, right? If you're a D, you're an infant. You're kind of stuck there. But you're getting inputs around your world. If you're a C, you're starting to crawl. Wow, I can move around. The B, you're walking, right? You're getting dangerous. You can start to get into stuff. And then at that top level, you're running. You got to have a lot more coordination to go from crawling to walking to running. So I would ask you, not out loud, but just think to yourself, for your organizations, with your strategic plan, with how you're measuring that, how you're communicating that, whether it's internally or externally to the community, what grade would you give yourself? So for the city of Fort Collins, I would say that when we started, some of those things I showed from like 2010 and 11, we started and we were crawling. And for us, that's fine, because we know if we wait for something to be perfect, we'll never do anything. We also have a very strong culture of continuous improvement. So we can start, we can put something out there and say, we're just crawling, because we know that we're going to evaluate that, we're going to figure out what worked well, what could we be doing better, and we're going to improve that and make it better. And I would say, with what I just showed you for 2017, we're still walking. Maybe we're walking fast, but we are definitely not running it. We have a number of improvements that we can do to when we can be, say, we're at that running stage and really firing all cylinders for our community. And this is a key takeaway, I think, is that it's not the destination, because you'll never really get there. It's that journey of trying to do better with taxpayer dollars and how you communicate that and tell your story with the community. So some key takeaways. I'm sure you've all got lots of plans. That's a great starting point for a strategic plan if you don't have one already. And think about what are those things that your organization needs to focus on within that period of time. What is that time horizon for you? And then what do you need to focus on within that time horizon? Those things could actually be specific strategic objectives that would be in a strategic plan. Next is to ask yourself, well, how do I measure if we're being successful in achieving that strategic objective? And then lastly, what are those things that you fund? How do they link to that strategic plan? And this takeaway is, I feel really strong about, just get started. Start somewhere. You might make a mistake, learn from it quickly and improve. That is a key point that I think a lot of municipalities, counties, local government, and even higher levels of government could learn from. And so with that, I would just say information really is power. And to the extent that you can take those inputs from various parts of your community, put them into a document that you actually use. For us, we're using to drive a budgeting process. We're having executive level dialogue about how we're doing in achieving those strategic objectives. How are we doing in achieving that strategic plan? For us and for our community, that's really powerful, and hopefully it's something that can be powerful for you as well.